Hey there! Welcome back to another peaceful evening together. Tonight, we're setting sail with Paul got shipwrecked. Again, Acts 27, a surprisingly calm retelling of one of the stormiest chapters in the New Testament. It's a story of rough seas, quiet faith, and the kind of trust that holds steady even when the waves don't blank. Before we cast off, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if these gentle journeys bring a bit of peace to your evening. And if you'd like, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always lovely to see where this little harbor of rest is reaching. Now, dim the lights, maybe let the sound of a fan or soft rain play in the background, and let your thoughts drift. Close your eyes. You've just awakened on the deck of an ancient Roman cargo ship, the sky overcast, the sea slowly rising, and Paul stands calmly at the bow, steady in faith, as the storm begins to whisper. There's something about shipwrecks that grabs us: the chaos of storms, the fear of sinking, and the unexpected peace that can come after. Why was Paul on that ship? Why didn't anyone listen when he warned them of danger? And how did he stay so calm in the middle of such a violent sea? These questions gently pull us closer. You see, Paul wasn't just a passenger. He was a prisoner on his way to stand trial in Rome. But his spirit wasn't bound. Even in chains, Paul's faith anchored him. And through his story tonight, you might find a little anchor for your own soul too. As we begin, let go of today's weight. Close your eyes or soften your gaze. Allow your body to rest and your heart to open. You're safe. You're held. Let the waves of this ancient tale rock you gently into stillness. This is the story of how Paul got shipwrecked. Again, now, imagine the soft creaking of a wooden ship under gentle waves. Picture the dim lantern light flickering against salt-worn wood. Paul stood among Roman guards and Sailor's hands likely bound, but his heart steady. Outside, the sky was turning from a pale evening blue into a heavy night. The journey was supposed to be straightforward. A transport ship bound for Italy, carrying cargo and men alike. But even the most ordinary journeys can take extraordinary turns. Paul had sensed it, felt it deep in his spirit that danger was ahead, and he spoke up. But his words, like so many quiet warnings, were brushed aside. Still, he didn't panic. He didn't shout or struggle. He simply waited. Waited on the Lord. And that's something worth holding on to, isn't it? In the chaos of our lives, in the storms we face, waiting, trusting, breathing, these are acts of faith. Tonight, as you lie in stillness, let Paul's calm be your calm. Let his journey whisper peace into your own. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to control the sea. You only need to rest in the story and let it speak. We'll follow Paul now, step by step, through uncertain weather, rising winds, and into the heart of a storm no sailor would ever forget. But before the waves crash and the boat begins to break, we begin here quietly, gently, with the understanding that even when the world is loud and unsteady, God is near. So breathe in again, deeply, and breathe out. Let your mind release the noise of the day. Let the ancient winds carry away your worries. Paul's story will take care of the rest. This is not just a story of survival. It's a reminder that faith doesn't always still the storm, but it always holds us through it. As we prepare to journey into this chapter of Scripture, remember this: Stories like Paul's aren't just history, they're patterns of peace for today. His ship may have sunk, but his faith never did. His body may have been battered by waves, but his spirit remained unshaken. Why? Because he knew who was in control. He knew that the one who made the sea could calm either, carry him through it. We'll revisit ancient ports and follow a map shaped by providence. You'll hear of seasoned sailors, unexpected kindness, and the subtle ways God speaks not in thunder, but in whispers, in the quiet courage of a man who never lost hope. Let this be more than a bedtime story. Let it be a moment of connection between you and a man who walked with God through winds and waves. And through his story, may your heart be reminded that you are not alone. Those storms do pass. That anchors hold. Close your eyes now. Let go of the day's questions. Let your thoughts be still like calm waters. And if your mind drifts, let it drift gently with the current of this narrative. You are right where you need to be. We are about to sail with Paul, with peace, with purpose. And it begins now. Before we find ourselves caught in the storm, we need to understand who Paul was and how he came to be on a ship headed for Rome. The story doesn't begin with wind and waves. It begins with purpose, with calling, and with a man who had once walked a very different path. Paul was not always Paul. Once, he was Saul of Tarsus, zealous man, committed to silencing the followers of Jesus. He was a Pharisee, well-educated, passionate, and driven. He believed he was doing God's work as he hunted down Christians, overseeing their imprisonment and even their deaths. But then something miraculous happened. On the road to Damascus, Saul encountered a light so bright, so overwhelming, that it knocked him to the ground. He heard a voice. "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" It was Jesus. That moment changed everything. Saul became Paul, a man reborn, a man on a mission not to destroy the church, but to build it. Paul traveled across cities, seas, and cultures, preaching the gospel, planting churches, and enduring hardship after hardship. Beatings, stonings, imprisonments, yet his resolve never wavered. Because Paul wasn't chasing comfort, was chasing Christ. His every step, his every word, his every breath was filled with purpose. By the time we reach Acts 27, Paul had already been arrested, unjustly accused by religious leaders who feared his influence. He stood trial multiple times, asserting his innocence and proclaiming his faith boldly. Eventually, he appealed to Caesar, a right he had as a Roman citizen. That's how he ended up on a ship, bound for Rome under guard, yet guided by God. The journey to Rome was not just a legal formality. For Paul, it was part of a divine assignment. He had been told in a vision that he would testify about Jesus in Rome. No storm could stop that. No shipwreck could cancel that calling. Paul knew his destiny was secure because it was anchored in God's promise. As the ship prepared to leave the port, Paul wasn't afraid. He was focused. He carried with him not only chains, but conviction. And though the world saw him as a prisoner, Paul saw himself as a messenger and ambassador of hope in the midst of despair. Close your eyes and picture him now standing on the docks, the sea breeze brushing against his worn robe, the sun casting long shadows over ancient stones. He knows this won't be easy, but he also knows this: God is with him. Let this moment sink into your spirit. Let Paul's courage inspire a quiet strength in you, because, like Paul, We all carry callings. We all face obstacles. And we all need the reminder that purpose can thrive even in prison, and that peace can anchor us even when we're waiting for the winds to rise. Paul's life had been a cascade of opposites, light replacing darkness, faith displacing fear, mission overwhelming comfort. As he moved from town to town, often relying on the hospitality of strangers and the grace of God, Paul developed a resilience that could only be formed in the fires of adversity. He knew what it meant to be hungry, to be rejected, to be misunderstood. Yet in all of it, he also knew what it meant to be loved by a Savior who had once stopped him dead in his tracks. There were moments when Paul could have turned back, when the beatings left him bruised, when the prison walls felt suffocating, when the crowds turned hostile. But he didn't. Because Paul wasn't living for applause or peace. He was living for the truth, and truth compelled him forward, no matter the cost. We read in the book of Acts how Paul, even as a prisoner, continued to speak life. He encouraged fellow believers. He wrote letters, many of which form part of the New Testament. He mentored young leaders like Timothy and Titus. He prayed constantly. His spirit was free, even when his body was bound. When he appealed to Caesar, Paul wasn't just exercising a legal right. He was moving in obedience. He sensed that God had a purpose in Rome. Perhaps it was to plant seeds in the hearts of Roman guards. Perhaps it was to reach the upper echelons of power with the message of grace. Whatever the reason, Paul trusted that his path, no matter how stormy, was led by divine hands. The Roman officials didn't know what to make of him. A Jewish teacher, claiming allegiance to a crucified man, yet speaking with such authority and clarity, some thought him mad. Others were intrigued. But all could see this man was different. He walked with assurance, not arrogance. He spoke with gentleness, not fear. As they prepared the ship, the crew would have seen Paul among the other prisoners. He was not loud, not boastful, but his eyes held peace. And when he spoke, people listened. There was weight in his words, not from force, but from faith. He likely looked out across the sea, not with dread, but with resolve. He had faced many dangers before. He had been shipwrecked before. He had been lashed, stoned, and hunted. And still, he stood. Still, he believed. For Paul, every hardship was an opportunity. Every delay is a chance to testify. Every obstacle is a platform for God's glory. That's what makes his story so powerful, not that he avoided the storm, but that he walked into it with eyes wide open, knowing who sailed with him. Tonight, as you prepare to sleep, let these truths rest with you. You are not alone in your journey. You are not forgotten in your waiting. Like Paul, you are carried by a purpose greater than fear, greater than storms, greater than circumstance. Your journey, like his, is still unfolding. Let your heart take courage. Let your breath be steady. Paul's path was not easy, but it was anointed, and so is yours. The sails were unfurled. The ropes creaked and groaned as the ship was eased from the dock. The sea welcomed the vessel with soft waves that whispered secrets beneath the hull. Paul, the prisoner, stepped aboard. This was not a grand ship. It was a grain transport vessel, a common type in the Roman Empire, crowded, rugged, and functional. Among the crew were sailors hardened by years on the water. Among the passengers, soldiers, other prisoners, and merchants. And among them all, one man whose presence, though quiet, would come to define the journey. Paul had been entrusted to a Roman centurion named Julius. Interestingly, Julius treated Paul with unusual kindness. Perhaps he saw something in him, something unshakable. Perhaps it was the way Paul met every gaze, spoke with calm authority, and moved with the grace of a man who had nothing to prove. Whatever it was, Julius allowed Paul certain freedoms during the journey, even letting him visit friends at some ports. As the ship left the port of Caesarea, the crew hoped for smooth sailing, but Paul sensed something else. He knew the seas. He had traveled often. He also knew what it meant to listen beyond the wind, beyond logic, to the stirrings of the Spirit. The initial days were uneventful. The ship stopped in Sidon, where Paul was allowed to disembark and receive care from believers. They prayed with him, embraced him, and encouraged him. Then the journey resumed. The sea grew rougher, the wind more unpredictable. The ship sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were against them. With each mile, conditions worsened. Progress slowed. And Paul, though still a prisoner, began to speak. He warned them, "Men, I perceive this voyage will end in disaster not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." But they didn't listen. The ship's owner, the captain, the centurion, they trusted the sailor's experience more than the prisoner's insight. It's often like that, isn't it? Wisdom can come from unexpected places, but pride keeps ears closed. Still, Paul didn't push. He had spoken. Now he would watch and wait. From the port of Myra, they transferred to an Alexandrian ship bound for Italy. It was larger, but no less vulnerable. The journey was now a struggle, navigating around Crete with difficulty. The days slipped by. The weather turned more hostile. The seasoned crew, who had once moved with confidence, now moved with caution. And Paul? He remained steady, observing, praying, trusting. At Fairhavens, they debated whether to stay or continue. Winter was approaching. Sailing was dangerous. But the harbor wasn't ideal for wintering. Against Paul's advice, they decided to press on toward Phoenix, a better port. And so, they set sail again. As the ship moved into open waters, the sea seemed to be still for a moment. A gentle breeze encouraged them. Perhaps they thought they had made the right choice. Perhaps they felt vindicated. But peace before the storm is often deceptive. In the distance, dark clouds were gathering, and soon the gentle breeze would give way to violent winds. Tonight, as you rest, imagine yourself aboard that vessel. Feel the sway, hear the groan of wood under strain, sense the tension in the crew. And above all, feel the presence of one man, Paul, who carries peace in his bones because he carries purpose in his heart. The boat rolled gently as it pushed forward, but tension was growing among those on board. The sailors eyed the skies more frequently now. Conversations dropped to murmurs. It's in these quiet stretches, where nothing seems urgent, that the soul has time to speak. And Paul listened. Every ripple against the hull was like a whisper of warning. The sea was a teacher, and Paul was a student of more than scripture. He understood patterns. He remembered past journeys. He could feel when something wasn't right, when the harmony between sky and sea was breaking down. But in that silence, Paul did not fear. He prayed. Perhaps silently, eyes closed, or perhaps quietly to those around him. He reminded them that God had not abandoned them, that his hand was always near. And in the calm before the storm, those words hung like lanterns in the dark. The ship pressed onward. Salt crusted the railings, the wind chilled their robes, and the sails flapped with increasing strain. They passed Salmone with difficulty. Every nautical mile was a labor. It was as if creation itself was protesting the voyage. One evening, the crew huddled in whispered debate. The sky was no longer a trustworthy guide. Stars were hidden, the moon veiled. Even the most seasoned seamen began to feel unease in their bones. And Paul? He watched, waiting not for disaster, but for direction. That's what faith does. It doesn't panic at the wave. It waits for the word. When the crew finally made the call to push toward Phoenix, they believed it was a tactical decision. Safer harbor, better shelter. But they didn't see what Paul sensate a storm, not just of weather, but of warning ignored. The wind shifted. A gentle southern breeze lulled them into hope. Sails caught, ropes strained, and the ship leaned forward with confidence. Perhaps someone even smiled. Perhaps they felt relief. But the sea has her own timing. And that night, the storm began to speak. A wind called Euroclydona. Tempestuous, violent force from the northeast descended suddenly. Waves rose like walls. The ship groaned. The breeze was no longer a friend, but a beast that battered every beam. The sailors lost control. They let the ship be driven. The calm voyage was over. Panic spread like fire. Men shouted. Barrels shifted. The ship creaked as it was hurled across the sea. They tried to undergird the vessel with ropes, fearing it would break apart. Cargo was tossed. Anchors dragged. The sky offered no stars. Days passed in this chaos. Time blurred. And yet Paul remained, not immune to fear, but grounded in faith. Tonight, let your breathing steady as you imagine that ship, adrift and battered, and there, in the midst of it, one man whose spirit did not flinch. Let Paul's stillness enter your own body now. Let your muscles relax. Let your thoughts quiet, because storms don't always mean failure. Sometimes, they're the path through which purpose moves. And though the storm has just begun, Paul's story and yours is far from over. On the second day, the storm continued without mercy. The sea seemed alive, angry, heaving with intent. The sun was gone, and the stars refused to shine. The sky pressed low like a lid over boiling water. And still, the ship did not stop. It could not. It was at the mercy of the wind. The sailors, exhausted and soaked, began throwing the cargo overboard. Everything they once valued, grain, supplies, goods, was now just weight dragging them closer to death. Desperation rearranges priorities. In the eye of survival, only life matters. Paul watched it all. He understood the gravity, but he also saw beyond it. This was more than chaos. It was cleansing. In the stripping away of material things, clarity often comes. And Paul, standing amid the wreckage of control, found a message stirring in his heart. He gathered the crew, the guards, and the prisoners. The storm still howled, but they listened. He said, "Men, you should have listened to me. Yet now I urge you to take heart. For there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For last night there stood by me an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve." They stared at him, perhaps in disbelief, perhaps in hope. Paul continued. The angel said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar. And indeed, God has granted you all those who sail with you." He looked around, eyes steady, voice calm. "Take heart, men, for I believe God, that it will be just as it was told me." That moment cut through the storm louder than any thunder. Paul, the prisoner, had become Paul, the prophet. And as they drifted through the black waters, the crew clung to his words. It's a reminder, even now, one person's peace can become another's anchor. The days stretched on, hope waned, yet Paul encouraged them to eat, to keep their strength. He broke bread, gave thanks, and passed it among them, not in a church, not in calm, but in a storm-tossed boat where communion became courage. He reminded them that their lives mattered, that their journey had meaning, that survival wasn't luck, it was a promise. Tonight, as you rest, picture that moment. The wind still roared, the waves still climbed, but inside that ship, faith flickered like a flame, small but unstoppable. Paul's presence transformed the atmosphere. Fear still whispered, but it had no final word. And as you drift into sleep, remember, storms don't define us. God's presence in the storm does. You are not drifting aimlessly. You are carried. And soon, even this sea will yield to peace. On the 14th night, the ship was still being driven across the Adriatic Sea. The sailors were weary, eyes hollow, limbs aching. The storm had not let up, but Paul's words lingered, quietly holding them together. Around midnight, the sailors sensed land approaching. The sound of waves breaking differently, a change in the air, a subtle shift in motion. They took soundings first 20 fathoms, then 15. Panic began to ripple again. What if they crashed on rocks? In haste, they dropped anchors and prayed for daylight. Some sailors tried to escape, pretending to lower anchors while planning to abandon ship. But Paul warned the centurion and soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." And for once, they listened. The ropes were cut. The boat dropped into the sea. No one fled. Morning came, veiled in gray. Paul urged everyone to eat. "Today is the 14th day you have waited and continued without food," he said. He broke bread again, thanked God in front of them all, and ate. Strength returned not just to their bodies, but to their spirits. There were 276 people aboard that ship, and because of Paul's faith, every single one would survive. At dawn, they saw a bay with a beach and decided to run the ship aground. They cut the anchors, untied the rudders, hoisted the foresail, and made for shore. But before they reached it, the ship struck a sandbar and stuck fast. The stern was broken by the pounding surf. Soldiers considered killing the prisoners to prevent escape, but the centurion, wanting to save Paul, stopped them. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard. The rest held onto planks or pieces of the ship. And so it was that all escaped safely to land. Even shipwreck, under God's hand, becomes salvation. Let that truth settle into your heart now. Storms come, and ships may break, but God's promises remain. Paul stood soaked but safe on the shores of Malta, a prisoner still, but also a vessel of peace, purpose, and divine presence. Let this image cradle your thoughts as you drift into sleep. A man, wrapped in soaked linen, eyes turned heavenward, breathing in the mercy of another chance. a storm behind him, a mission still ahead. You too are being carried. You too will reach the shore. Sleep now, wrapped in the peace that Paul knew, not from perfect circumstances, but from a perfect Savior. Your journey continues tomorrow. For now, rest. You are safe. Long before the storm crashed down, the signs were already there. Small signals in the wind, subtle shifts in the waves, delays and detours that seemed minor but to Paul, they meant something deeper. He had learned, over many trials, how to read more than the surface of things. The seas grew moodier with each passing day. What had begun as a manageable journey was turning into a drawn-out struggle. The winds no longer cooperated. The waves, once playful, now rolled with weight. Every sailor on board, no matter how seasoned, began to feel the pressure mounting. The tension among the crew was growing. They were quiet at night, their voices low, glances exchanged in silence. The centurion, Julius, maintained control, but even he checked the horizon more often now. The ship was slow to respond, heavy with its cargo and burdened with human uncertainty. Paul watched it all not with fear, but with knowing. One afternoon, as the crew debated their next move, Paul stepped forward. "Men," he said gently, "I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster, and much loss not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." His words were met with polite silence, then dismissal. The ship's owner and helmsman disagreed. They had seen worse, they said. The harbor was not suitable to winter in. Phoenix was better if only they could get there. They weighed the risks and chose movement over stillness. It's a choice we all face sometimes. Rush ahead or wait in discomfort. Most choose the former, even when warning whispers ask us to slow down. As they sailed further, the warning signs turned into certainties. The wind, once manageable, turned fierce. The sea churned beneath the colorless sky. Even the gulls had vanished. It was as if creation itself had taken a breath and held it. Still, Paul waited. Storms don't always arrive in a roar. Sometimes, they creep in like fog layer by layer until you can't see where you are, or where you're going. That's how fear works. That's how doubt sneaks in. And yet, in this gathering uncertainty, Paul's faith was the one thing that did not shift. His anchor was not tied to circumstances, but to the one who commands the winds and the waves. So he prayed. Not frantic prayers, but steady ones. And as he stood on the deck of that creaking ship, he carried with him a peace deeper than the deepest ocean. The storm was coming. But Paul had already found shelter. And tonight, as you prepare to sleep, let this truth wrap around you. Warnings are not punishments. They're invitations to pause, to reflect, to trust. The sky is dark, but the light of faith still glows. And soon, it will shine even brighter. Paul understood storms, not just the kind that stirred the sea, but the kind that stirred the soul. He had endured prison cells, colder than any ocean wind, faced beatings harsher than hail. Yet none of those experiences hardened him. They refined him. So when he felt the unease rising in the wind, he didn't panish discerned. Discernment is a quiet gift. It doesn't always shout. It nudges. It whispers. Paul had learned to listen to those divine nudges. He had learned to trust the voice of the Spirit more than the voices of experts. Still, it takes courage to speak up when no one wants to hear what you have to say. Paul's warning wasn't dramatic. It was calm, thoughtful, offered like a light in fog. But people don't always want light. They want momentum. The centurion, swayed by the helmsman and the owner, chose the illusion of progress over the security of pause. That choice, made in confidence, would soon unravel. They set out toward Phoenix, believing they could make it. And at first, it looked promising. A southern wind blew gently across the water, just enough to lift their hopes. They raised the anchor and hugged the coast, trying to stay safe. But then, without warning, it shifted. The wind turned cruel and fierce, blowing down from the northeast with a violence they couldn't control. It was no longer a voyage. It was a survival. The ship was caught in the grip of the storm. They couldn't face the wind, so they let the ship be driven. Paul said nothing now. His words had already been spoken. All he could do was trust. Sometimes, that's all we can do too. As the storm grew, the crew threw cargo overboard. They feared the ship would split apart. On the third day, they tossed the ship's equipment into the sea. And still, the storm raged. They hadn't seen the sun or stars for many days. Navigation was impossible. Hope was fading. But Paul carried something they couldn't see. He stood again, this time not to warn, but to encourage. He reminded them that the God he served had spoken, that though the ship would be lost, no lives would be. "Take heart," he told them. And somehow, even in the middle of chaos, his words wrapped around them like a blanket. You see, storms do not erase promises. They reveal them. Paul knew the value of unease. It was not the enemy. It was the signal. And in that uneasy silence, faith finds its footing. Let your soul rest tonight in that same truth. You don't need the storm to pass to find peace. You just need to know who is in the boat with you. And that makes all the difference. Night fell again, and the ship groaned under the pressure. Men who had once barked orders now whispered prayers. The sky remained silent. Rain fell in curtains. The deck turned slick. Sleep became a memory. Hunger gnawed at the men's stomachs, but fear fed more loudly. And yet, Paul walked the deck like a man anchored to something beyond the physical. He had seen storms before, but this one wasn't just about weather. It was about trust. Could they believe that survival was still possible, even after days of darkness? Could they hold on to hope, even when every human plan had failed? Faith doesn't flourish in comfort. It grows in contradiction. And Paul, in chains, was the freest man on that boat. He reminded them all, God had a plan. Do not be afraid, the angel had said. You must stand before Caesar. Paul wasn't clinging to a vague sense of optimism. He was holding on to a specific word, and that word gave him strength. In storms, it's not the size of the waves that matters. It's the strength of your anchor. For Paul, that anchor was God's voice. And for you, lying in bed tonight, that same voice still speaks. You may not know where the storm ends, but you can know who walks with you in it. Paul's calm wasn't denial. It was defiance. Not against nature, but against fear. He refused to surrender to panic. And his peace, like a stone dropped in water, rippled outward, steadying others. By now, the sailors were beginning to look to him. The centurion watched him closely. The prisoners listened when he spoke. The storm had leveled their ranks. Now all were simply men clinging to survival. reaching for something solid. And Paul was that something. He spoke life when all around them was loss. Let that image hold you now. Let your chest rise slowly with each breath. Let your body soften into stillness. You don't need to know every outcome. You only need to trust in the one who does. Because even when storms roar, peace has a voice. And tonight, it's whispering to you. Take heart. You're not forgotten. The light will return. Paul's presence, so steady and strong, didn't come from confidence in himself, but from communion with God. While others feared for their lives, Paul had been in prayer, not just asking for deliverance, but listening, seeking clarity, holding space for God's response. That night, as the wind shrieked and the timbers strained, Paul likely remembered, past storms remembered, how God had rescued him before. This wasn't the first ship he'd feared might sink, and it wouldn't be the last. But each time he was reminded, God's hand does not falter. He might have thought of the churches he had planted, the letters he had written, the faces of believers he had encouraged. He knew he still had a mission. Rome wasn't just a destination, it was a divine appointment, and God was not finished with him. The crew, fatigued and near despair, began to see something shift. Not in the weather, but in Paul. He spoke less like a prisoner and more like a captain. Not because he gave orders, but because he gave hope. His calm was magnetic. There was still tension, still unknowns. But in Paul's presence, the crew began to believe survival was possible. It's remarkable how one person's peace can steady many. Paul didn't change the storm, but he changed the atmosphere inside the storm. You can do the same. In your life, there may be winds and waves right now. You may feel adrift, but peace is not the absence of troublets, the presence of trust. Paul's story reminds us, unease is not weakness. It's an invitation to lean in, to pray deeper, to listen harder. So tonight, as your breathing slows and your limbs grow heavy with rest, imagine you're there on that boat with Paul. The storm surrounds you, but there's a light flickering from within, a voice steady and soft, reminding you, you are not alone. You don't need to be the strongest. You just need to be still. The waves may continue for a while. The stars may stay hidden. But morning will come. And when it does, you'll find that the peace you carried through the storm has shaped you more than the storm ever could. Let your heart be quiet now. Let your spirit be still. Like Paul, you are heard. You are held. And even here, especially here, God is nearby. The storm had arrived in full. Not the whisper of wind or the rumble of distant clouds, but a relentless force, howling with fury. The sea heaved like a living thing, tossing the ship as if it were a toy. Waves crashed over the sides, drenching the men and swallowing their cries. Paul stood near the center of the chaos. Chains still on his wrists, yet his presence was an anchor for the souls around him. He had spoken of this moment, and now it had come. The wind tore through the sails, the ropes groaned, the wood creaked under pressure. Each man clung to something, some to the railings, some to each other, some to fading hopes. Yet Paul clung to God. He had received a promise that not one life would be lost. But that didn't mean the storm would pass quickly. No, this storm had a purpose, and Paul, though soaked and shivering, understood that purpose. The crew worked without rest. Days and nights blurred into a single stretch of struggle. They threw more cargo into the sea, then the ship's tackle, then anything that could lighten the load. They were not steering anymore, they were surviving. Still, no sun. Still, no stars. No sense of direction. No promise of land. But Paul never wavered. Each time fear surged among the crew, Paul spoke again, not with panic, but with peace. "Be of good cheer," he reminded them, "for I believe God. It will be just as he said." Some scoffed, but others began to listen. When a man speaks hope with that kind of calm, it cuts through the storm. Paul encouraged them to eat. 14 days without food had weakened them. He broke bread, gave thanks, and passed it around. A simple act, but powerful. A moment of sacred stillness in the midst of roaring wind. And still, the ship was driven onward. They tried every tactic they knew, but the sea was not listening. It raged on, wild and without mercy. And yet, within the storm, a quiet strength held the crew together, a strength that did not come from charts or compasses, but from the faith of one man. Paul prayed, not for rescue, but for resolve. Not for ease, but for endurance. Because sometimes God doesn't calm the storm. Sometimes he calms his child. And tonight, as you listen, let the waves of this story wash over your worry. Let the rhythm of the sea steady your heartbeat. You don't need to escape the storm to find peace. Just breathe, because peace has already found you. The sounds of the storm became a language of their own howls, creaks, splashes, and the deep groan of a ship under siege. Water surged over the deck, chilling bones and stealing breath. Still the men held on, muscles trembling, eyes wide. They had run out of strength long before they ran out of fear. Some wept quietly, their hands raw from ropes. Others stared into the dark, searching for a shore that didn't appear. The darkness was total clouds blotted out the sky, and the sea offered no reflection. But in that darkness, Paul's voice came again. "We must run aground on a certain island," he said with certainty. He didn't know the name, but he knew the outcome. His faith, sharpened by past trials, was like a lantern in the black. On the 14th night, they sensed a change. A subtle shift in the way the waves moved. A scent in the air. Land was near. The sailors took soundings and confirmed it they were approaching shore. Fear surged anew. What if they crashed on unseen rocks? They dropped anchors, 4 of them, hoping to slow the drift. Then they waited for dawn. It was the longest night yet. The wind still screamed, but beneath it, hearts began to believe. Paul had said they would live. Could it be true? Some sailors, desperate, tried to escape in the lifeboat, but Paul saw it and told the centurion, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." The soldiers cut the ropes. The lifeboat dropped away, empty. Dawn finally came, pale and gray. The sea remained rough, but they could now see a bay and a beach. They raised the foresail and made for it, cutting the anchors and trusting the wind one last time. But the ship struck a sandbar. The bow jammed fast. The stern began to break apart. Some soldiers reached for their swords, better to kill the prisoners than risk their escape. But the centurion, now fully aware of Paul's divine protection, stopped them. "Let them live," he said. Paul had saved them all, not with weapons or orders, but with faith. Those who could swim leapt into the surf. Others grabbed planks, and slowly, miraculously, one by one they reached the shore. Every single life, just as Paul had said. And now, soaked, shivering, exhausted, they collapsed on the sands of Malta. Safe. The storm had passed, but its lessons lingered. You see, survival wasn't just physical. It was spiritual. It was the discovery that even in destruction, God delivers. That's the gift of the storm. It doesn't just end, it transforms. And tonight, that transformation is yours too. Let go of the fear. Let go of the strain. Like Paul, stand not because the storm is over, but because God is with you in the midst of it. You are not broken. You are being rebuilt. You are not lost. You are being led. You are not alone. You are loved. That beach became more than landed, was a promise fulfilled. The moment Paul's feet touched the sand, he must have breathed deeply, not only with relief, but with reverence. Not a single soul had been lost. Not one. It was more than survival. It was testimony. The people of Malta welcomed them, building fires to warm the soaked and shivering strangers. For Paul, it was another opportunity. Another chance to show that faith doesn't stop at the edge of the storm, it shines even brighter on the shore. As the fire crackled and steam rose from drenched cloaks, Paul gathered sticks to help. And then a viper, hidden in the bundle, struck his hand. The islanders gasped. They assumed he must be cursed. Who survives a shipwreck only to be killed by a snake? But Paul simply shook it off into the fire. He didn't panic. He didn't even flinch. Why? Because he knew the storm hadn't brought him here to die. It had brought him here to minister. The people watched, waiting for him to swell up or fall. But nothing happened. Their fear turned to awe. And once again, Paul's presence changed everything. News spread quickly. The chief official of the island, Publius, welcomed Paul and his companions. Paul prayed for Publius's father, who was sick in bed with fever and dysentery, and he was healed. Others came, bringing their sick, and Paul healed them too. What began as a wreck ended as a revival. The same storm that stripped them of everything gave them something greater: connection, clarity, compassion. 3 months they stayed on Malta, and when they left, it was not in shame or weakness, but with honor. The people provided them with supplies, blessings, and gratitude. Think of it. Paul entered Malta as a prisoner. He left a prophet. Because storms don't stop God's plans. They only redirect them. And now, as you lie in stillness, take this story into your breath. You may be in the middle of your own storm. You may feel tossed, broken, unsure. But remember what Paul knew. Faith holds fast, even when the ship breaks. Purpose continues, even when the plan changes. And God speaks, even in the roar of the wind. So, rest tonight, not because all is quiet, but because your soul is. Let your heart find the calm that Paul carried. Let your spirit be wrapped in the truth that you are guided, not by chance, not by fear, but by love. You're not on this journey alone. You're exactly where you need to be. And the shore? It's closer than you think. Storms change us, not just by what they take, but by what they leave behind. The wreckage becomes memory, and the memory becomes meaning. Paul had been through many trials, but this storm, this shipwreck, This divine detour was something different. It showed everyone what endurance through faith looks like. Not loud, not flashy, but quiet, consistent, immovable. Each of us faces moments like that, when all we can do is hold on. When nothing around us makes sense, but something within us says, keep going. Paul never doubted the destination, only the route. That's the gift of spiritual vision. Knowing the outcome, even when the map is unclear. As they stayed on Malta, Paul must have looked back, often toward the sea, toward the shipwreck. Maybe he even walked the beach at night, barefoot, talking with God, thanking Him, listening for the next step, reflecting on the strange, beautiful way storms bring clarity. What was once a moment of terror had become a miracle retold. That's how God works. He redeems. And He's doing the same for you. Your storm might not look like Paul's. Maybe it's quieter but no less fierce. Maybe it's internal, invisible to others. Maybe it's ongoing. But hear this. Peace is not the absence of pain. It's the presence of promise. Paul's peace didn't depend on smooth seas. It came from a still heart. So tonight, if your thoughts are racing, slow them. Breathe deeply. Imagine the rhythm of the waves after the storm. Imagine Paul, calm, walking the shore. Feel the sand beneath your feet. The wind now gentle. The world no longer spinning. You are safe. Not because the storm didn't happen, but because you've survived. There's strength in your story. There's purpose in your path. You don't need to rush to the next thing. Let this be enough, this peace, this breath, this moment. Because God isn't just in the victory, He's in the wreckage too. And sometimes, the holiest ground is the broken shore we never planned to stand on. So rest here, on this holy ground. You've made it through the wind. You've stood in the waves. And now, you are still. Let sleep come, soft as sunrise over Malta. You're not adrift anymore. You're home. Somewhere amid the crashing waves and creaking timbers, when all seemed lost, a presence appeared to Paul. It wasn't in the thunder or the wind. It wasn't even in the hush after the chaos. It came in the middle of the storm. An angel stood before him, a divine messenger with a message so clear, so specific, that Paul's heart steadied instantly. "Do not be afraid, Paul," the angel said. "You must be brought before Caesar, and indeed, God has granted you all those who sail with you." Paul listened, soaked to the bone, rocked by the sea but completely still inside. Heaven had spoken, not to remove the storm, but to reassure him within it. And this message changed everything. When Paul told the others what he had seen and heard, he wasn't trying to stir drama or command attention. He simply wanted them to know that this wasn't the end. The storm might have stripped their control, but it hadn't touched their destiny. There is something powerful about hearing from God in the middle of uncertainty. It doesn't always silence the storm, but it silences the fear inside the storm. Paul stood in faith not because the wind stopped, but because his heart was anchored to something deeper than the sea. He shared the message with courage. "Take heart," he said, "for I believe in God." Those 4 words, "I believe God," were the most powerful words spoken on that ship. He didn't say, "I hope everything works out." He didn't say, "Let's stay positive." He said, "I believe in God." And that belief was contagious. As he moved among the crew, a subtle shift occurred. Despair turned to endurance. Panic turned to patience. Even those who didn't share his faith found shelter in his peace. Because when one person stands firm in a storm, others are strengthened too. That's the power of divine assurance. Tonight, remember that God still sends messengers. Maybe not with wings and glory, but with whispers. With peace that interrupts anxiety. With the truth that pierces doubt. With a presence that settles your soul. Maybe the message for you tonight is simple. Do not be afraid. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. Take heart, because just like Paul, you're going to make it through this. And there's a purpose on the other side. The moment Paul saw the angel was more than just comfort, it was confirmation. Every trial he had endured, every step that led him to this moment, now made sense. God had not abandoned him. God had prepared him. This was not a surprise encounter. It was the continuation of a divine conversation that had been ongoing for years, through prayers, through visions, through moments in silence. And now, it came with clarity. The angel didn't say the storm would stop. He didn't promise a smooth journey. He simply reminded Paul of his calling. You must stand before Caesar. The mission hadn't changed. God's word hadn't shifted with the winds. And that was enough for Paul. He didn't need every answer. He just needed that anchor. Sometimes, that's all we need too. We look for explanations when we really need assurance. We want the map, but God gives us a compass pointing to his promises, not always to our preferences. As Paul shared the vision with the others, it wasn't dramatic. It was steady. It was honest. I believe God, he said. And in that belief, a trembling ship found new footing. It's easy to doubt in darkness, easy to question everything when nothing seems certain. But Paul had practiced trust. He had trained his heart to respond to God's voice, even when it whispered in a whirlwind. That kind of faith doesn't happen overnight. It's formed in valleys, forged in fire. Paul's confidence wasn't personality. It was perspective. He knew storms come and go. He knew comfort was fleeting, but he also knew that God was constant. Let that settle into you now. As you lie still, breathing deeply, letting the weight of the day fall away, hear those words again. Do not be afraid. Let them echo through every part of you. Fear will come, doubt will knock, but they don't get to stay. Not when faith is spoken. Tonight, allow yourself to believe, not just in ideas or outcomes, but in the God who speaks peace into chaos. The God who meets you not after the storm, but in it. The same God who sent an angel to Paul still speaks now. Take heart. The message hasn't changed. You are going to make it. Think of the weight those words carried for Paul. You must stand before Caesar. It wasn't just a prophesy. It was a reminder that his life had direction. Even when the ship didn't, it gave him focus. It gave him clarity. And perhaps it gave him courage to keep stepping forward when others froze. Paul wasn't rescued from the storm. He was reassured in it. That's a vital difference. Sometimes the miracle isn't the absence of trial, but the presence of God in the middle of it. This is where trust becomes more than theology. It becomes survival. Because when God says, you will survive, that doesn't mean the journey won't hurt. It means the destination is still yours. Paul had been beaten, betrayed, imprisoned, and now shipwrecked, but not broken. And in that moment of divine visitation, he was reminded, you're not finished yet. You are still chosen. There is more. You see, Paul didn't just believe in God's existence. He believed in God's faithfulness. That's a huge difference. And that difference allowed him to speak with confidence while waves slammed against the hull. It allowed him to walk among the terrified with peace in his eyes and a promise in his voice. "Take heart," he said. That's the phrase that echoed through the ship. Take heart not because of what you feel, but because of what you know. That is what the angel brought. Not new instructions, but sacred affirmation. Paul didn't need a changed path. He needed a strengthened heart. And so do we. The angel didn't explain the timing. He didn't predict the waves. He didn't map out the exact point of the shipwreck or describe how they'd reach the shore. He just said, "You will make it." And not only you, but everyone with you. God had granted Paul the lives of all on board. That was grace beyond comprehension. That was a ripple effect of faith. And Paul became the lighthouse in the storm. Now tonight, as your body relaxes and your breathing deepens, ask yourself, what is the angel saying to you? It may not come in thunder or dreams. It may come in a verse you can't forget, a prayer you whispered long ago, a moment of quiet that turns into calm. That is God, still speaking, still guiding, still promising. Do not be afraid. You are going to make it. And your presence, your peace, may be the anchor someone else needs too. You see, divine messages rarely come when we expect them. They often find us in the night, in the noise, in the middle of things breaking down. That's what makes them divine. They interrupt. They interrupt our spirals. They interrupt our assumptions. They interrupt our fear. That angel didn't give Paul comfort food or shelter. He gave him something stronger. Truth. And truth outlasts storms. Paul didn't cling to sails, or rope he clung to that word. And it gave him enough strength to carry others too. Because sometimes, one person's revelation becomes a refuge for many. Imagine that ship now, men, soaked, exhausted, pale with hunger and fear. But something has shifted. They begin to believe not in themselves, but in the God Paul trusts. They begin to hope again. They rest a little more. They eat. They prepare. Because they've heard the message, even if they haven't seen the messenger. That's what faith does. It gives vision to the blind. It says, "I haven't seen the end yet, but I trust the one who has." So they wait. They brace. They believe. And Paul? He continues praying. Not just for himself, but for all 275 other souls. He prays for their hearts. He prays for their futures. He prays that the storm not be wasted. He knows this isn't just about surviving. It's about witnessing. Because every storm Paul endured, every miracle he experienced, became a testimony. A letter written in spirit. A sermon without words. A glimpse of God. And now, so does yours. Your own storm, whatever form it takes, is shaping a story of endurance, faith, and grace. You may not feel heroic. You may not feel ready. But your quiet courage matters. You too carry a message. You too are being watched by those who need hope. So speak peace. Even if your hands are shaking, even if your heart is tired, speak peace. Let the presence of God be your strength. Let His words carry you. Do not be afraid. Let His promise guide you. You will reach your purpose. And let His peace wash over you, now soft as breath, deep as the sea. Sleep, wrapped in the certainty that the God who sends angels still walks beside you. The storm is not the end. It's the beginning of a greater testimony, and you're right in the middle of it, held, guided, loved. You're going to make it. The storm had passed. The waves no longer roared, but the damage was done. The ship had struck a reef and broken apart. Bits of timber floated where sails once caught wind. What was once a vessel of control had become driftwood. Yet, every soul made it to shore. Malta, an island unknown to most of them. Foreign land, foreign people, but they were alive. Wet, cold, exhausted but breathing. The islanders came quickly. They didn't turn away. They didn't demand explanations. They built a fire. They offered warmth. Kindness met them at the water's edge. And Paul, ever the servant, gathered sticks to help. As he placed them in the flames, a snake, driven out by the heat, latched onto his hand. The locals gasped. "This man must be cursed," they whispered. "He escaped the sea, but justice will not let him live." But Paul simply shook the snake off into the fire. No panic, no drama, and nothing happened. He didn't swell. He didn't fall. He didn't die. They watched in awe. The man they had labeled a criminal, they now called a god. But Paul wasn't interested in titles. He was interested in truth. The real miracle wasn't the snakebite tight, was the peace. That same unshakable calm that carried him through the storm now stood firm on shore. This was what Paul did. Wherever he landed, shipwreck or synagogue, he brought healing, hope. And now, Malta would become another chapter of redemption. Publius, the chief of the island, welcomed Paul and the others. His father lay sick, fevered and weak. Paul prayed, Paul touched, and healing came. Word spread. The sick were brought in droves. Paul did not shrink back. He did not seek praise. He simply served. The man who had walked through waves now walked through wounds, offering healing in every step. He had lost the ship, but he had not lost the mission. And Malta became more than a refuge. It became a revival. Tonight, as you rest, remember, your storm may wreck the vessel, but not the voyage. God still works in broken places. He still builds a fire from splinters. And he still speaks through servants like Paul. And like you. The islanders didn't speak Paul's language, but kindness translated easily. They saw the broken ship, the tired faces, the battered limb sand. They responded with firelight and food. Simple gestures, powerful grace. And Paul, though still weary from the sea, didn't sit back. He moved among the people. He listened. He helped. Because that's what peace does. It doesn't wait for ideal circumstances. It moves wherever it's needed. The days turned to weeks. Malta, once a mystery, became familiar. The men began to heal, physically, emotionally. They shared stories by the fire. They spoke of near death and new life. And in those quiet conversations, something sacred formed. A community, a sense of purpose. Paul became more than a survivor. He became a shepherd. He didn't preach sermons from pulpits. He preached with his presence, with his compassion, with his consistent faith. And the island noticed. Publius, seeing what Paul had done for his father, opened his home fully. Others followed. Sickness began to disappear. Hope began to rise. Paul wasn't performing miracles. He was simply participating in what God was already doing, bringing light into places others had forgotten. That's what healing really is. It's showing up in broken spaces with a heart wide open. Paul could have seen Malta as a delay, an accident, an interruption, but he didn't. He saw it as an assignment, and so can we. Your Malta might look like an unexpected pause, a detour, a place you didn't choose, but it might be the very space where healing happens both in you and through you. Paul stayed for 3 months, long enough for wounds to heal, long enough for faith to grow. And when the time came to leave, the people loaded him with supplies provisions for the journey ahead, not out of duty, but out of gratitude. Because when you bring peace, people remember. As the ship prepared to sail, Paul looked back not in regret, but in reverence. The storm had led to salvation. The wreck had led to revival. The prisoner had become a prophet, and the island had become a sanctuary. Let this comfort you tonight. The places that feel like ends might be beginnings. God wastes nothing, not storms, not shipwrecks, not snakes. Only He can turn brokenness into blessing. Only He can turn Malta into a miracle. And perhaps that's the point of Malta. It wasn't the destination Paul planned, but it was the destination God provided. A place for rest, recovery, and renewed purpose. Sometimes, the storm we dread is just the escort to the place we need. Paul might have spent those 3 months replaying the journey. The warning was unheeded. The wind is rising. The prayers, the angel, the silence of drifting. The relief of solid ground. But he didn't linger in what could have been. He lived in what was. Every day on Malta was a testimony. Not loud, not forced, but steady. That's the beauty of spiritual resilience. It shows up in quiet strength, in healing touch, in the willingness to serve when no one is watching. Paul never saw interruptions, only invitations. Invitations to care, to speak, to trust. And tonight, maybe you're in a Malta of your own. You've survived the storm, but you're not yet where you thought you'd be. Let this story remind you, you're not lost. You're being prepared. Because the most powerful ministries don't always happen in temples or cities. Sometimes they happen on quiet islands, in forgotten places, among people who never expected miracles. Paul gave Malta his presence, and God gave Malta his power. Lives were changed, hearts were healed. And Paul, he was refined, because Malta wasn't just about the mission, it was about mercy. God could have taken Paul straight to Rome, but he didn't. He paused, placed him, used him, and the result was more than a miracle. It was multiplication. One man's obedience led to a whole island's awakening. So, wherever you are tonight, if you're feeling delayed or detoured, know this. Your presence carries purpose. Your peace matters. Your faith speaks. Your stillness ministers. You don't need a pulpit. You only need to be present. Just like Paul. Just like Malta. And when your time on the island is done, you'll leave not just with what you brought, but with more. More faith. More clarity. More strength. Because that's what Malta gives. So rest now. Let your spirit settle. Let your heart soften. This detour is sacred, and the healing has already begun. Paul's time on Malta was more than survival, it was stewardship. He didn't waste the grace he'd been given. He used every breath to bless, every pause to pray, and in doing so, he gave Malta a glimpse of heaven. Perhaps you've wondered, like Paul might have, why certain paths take so long, why the road winds, why the sea rages, why Malta ever had to happen. But look again, not with weary eyes, but with hopeful ones. Malta wasn't a punishment. It was a provision. It wasn't a detour. It was destiny, disguised as delay. And in the stillness of island days and healing nights, Paul found more than a safe place. He found that faith flourishes where fear once reigned, that even in the aftermath, God is still present, still working, still redeeming. Let these truths hold you tonight. You may be soaking from your own storm. You may be standing on unfamiliar shores, but you are not abandoned. You are not forgotten. You're on holy ground. God is not finished with you. He's just beginning a new chapter on that will echo far beyond the island you stand on. So let Malta teach you to trust the pauses, to cherish the calm, to believe in the beauty of rebuilding. Paul sailed on, eventually reaching Rome, but a piece of his heart surely stayed behind with the people he healed, the lives he touched, the fire he helped light. That's legacy. That's the impact. Not through noise, but through presence. And now, as your eyes grow heavy and your breathing deepens, rest in the knowledge that even your shipwrecks are sacred. Even your setbacks are stages for grace. Even Malta has a miracle waiting. You're not alone on the shore. You're seen. You're safe. You're home. Though Paul stood with strength through the storm, it didn't mean the weight of his journey disappeared. Faith doesn't erase the human experience, it carries it. After Malta, as the path to Rome opened once more, Paul had time to reflect. The sea was calm again, but his heart still held echoes of waves. Sometimes, it's not the storm that challenges you, but the quiet after the moments when adrenaline fades and reality settles. Paul was still a prisoner. He still wore chains. And ahead of him stood Caesar, not just a courtroom, but the core of an empire. Was there fear? Maybe. Was there exhaustion? Almost certainly. But more than that, there was faith. A faith not built on feelings, but on promises. Paul's faith had been tested in every way by beatings, by betrayal, by storms and serpents. And now, it was being tested again, not by violence, but by waiting, by wondering, by holding steady in the unknown. That's a quiet crisis, but a real one. And Paul chose to believe anyway. He prayed. He encouraged others. He kept his eyes on the purpose, not the prison. Faith in crisis isn't about shouting louder. It's about standing still. It's about breathing when your chest is tight, smiling when your heart aches, loving when you don't know what's next. Paul's strength wasn't superhuman. It was spiritual, and it came from surrender. He had given his journey to God, and that meant every stop, every delay, every trial was part of something bigger. Even his chains became a message. And so can yours. Whatever binds you right now, fear, doubt, delay can still be used. Your faith, like Paul's, doesn't need perfect conditions. It only needs trust. And that trust, quiet and firm, can move mountains. Let that truth hold you tonight. Paul's story isn't just about storms survived. It's about faith refined. And your story, even now, is doing the same. Rest in that. You are not failing. You are growing. And God, is still with you. Faith during the storm is visible. It clings to hope. It speaks loud encouragement over crashing waves. But faith after the storm, that's where it becomes quiet endurance. For Paul, Malta had been a miracle. But the path ahead wasn't simple. The chains were still there. Rome still loomed. And though his heart burned with purpose, his body bore the weariness of long suffering. Have you ever felt that weight? When the crowd is gone, when the miracles slow, when the adrenaline fades, that's when crisis sneaks in not as noise, but as silence. Paul's crisis was subtle. Not disbelief, but weariness. Not doubt in God, but in himself. Could he still be strong enough to finish the journey? Could he still speak truth in the shadow of Caesar? That's what makes Paul's faith so remarkable. He didn't need signs. He didn't demand answers. He just kept walking. He leaned on grace. He looked to the Spirit. He remembered every word Jesus had spoken to him. Faith isn't the absence of fear. It's the presence of forward motion. Even when tired. Even when unsure. And Paul moved forward. Step by step. Ship by ship. City by city. His words and letters reflected this. I have learned to be content, he wrote. Not because life was easy, but because he had discovered the secret. God was enough. And if God was enough in prison, he would be enough in Rome. That's the kind of faith that doesn't flinch. That's the kind of faith that grows stronger in shadows. And tonight, that's the kind of faith available to you. You may feel tired. You may feel unsure. But if you keep walking, just walking, you're living Paul's faith. And you're not walking alone. You're being led. You're being held. And even your silence is a song of worship to the God who sees everything. So, sleep in peace tonight. Faith is still alive in you. And your crisis is not your conclusion, it's your construction. You're becoming stronger. You're becoming clearer. You're becoming more like the one who carries you. Paul's faith was not a straight linear. It was a journey of peaks and valleys. He rejoiced in moments of clarity and wrestled in moments of silence. Yet through it all, he remained anchored. Even when he questioned, he trusted. Even when he hurt, he hoped. And that kind of faith is forged, not found. Think of the years behind him. The road to Damascus, the beatings in Lystra, the prison in Philippi, the debates in Athens, the riot in Ephesus. Now, the shipwreck in Malta. Each event chipped away at pride and built deeper resolve. That's what crisis does, it reveals the foundation. Paul's foundation was Christ. Not reputation, not comfort, not outcome. Christ alone. So when fear whispered, Paul listened to a louder voice. The Spirit reminded him of promises. The letters he wrote during this time are filled with lines that speak of strength, not his own. Peace that defies understanding, and joy in all circumstances. This wasn't performance. This was perseverance. And it's available to you too. Your faith doesn't need to shout. It needs to stay. Stay when the way is unclear. Stay when you're not strong. Stay when it feels like God is quiet. Because faith that stays is faith that shapes you. And when Paul reached Rome, it wasn't as a victim, it was as a vessel, still chained, still waiting, but filled with peace. He welcomed visitors. He taught with boldness. He loved deeply. He wrote timeless truth. Because faith in crisis doesn't stop. It adapts. It deepens. And so can yours. Tonight, don't rush past the hard places. Let them form you. Let them teach you. Let them refine what comfort cannot. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're becoming. And the God who saw Paul through storms and prisons in Palacesis, seeing you through too. Let go of the pressure to have it all figured out. Rest in the arms of the one who holds all things together. He's not distant. He's near. He's not silent. He's speaking through stillness, through scripture, through the steady beat of your heart. You are loved. You are held. And this faith, even now, is enough. Crisis invites us to decide, will we run or will we root? Paul rooted. He didn't chase escape. He embraced endurance, not because he enjoyed hardship, but because he trusted its purpose. Every trial shaped him. Every limitation drew him closer to God. Every delay revealed deeper dependency. In Rome, Paul wasn't free in the way the world defines freedom. He lived under guard, unable to go where he pleased. But his spiritist words, his vision was untouched. He wrote letters that would outlive empires. He discipled leaders who would shape generations. He mentored quietly, deeply, faithfully. Because faith in crisis doesn't shrink. It expands. It learns to see hope in waiting rooms and hear heaven in locked spaces. And maybe tonight, your soul feels chained, not by iron, but by circumstance, by doubt, by exhaustion. That's okay. God meets us there. He met Paul with comfort, with clarity, with strength. And he meets you too. You don't have to fake joy. You don't have to mask uncertainty. You just have to stay close. Close to the Word. Close to the whispers of grace. Close to the truth that God still moves, even when you don't. Paul's influence didn't peak on stages. It blossomed in chains. That's the paradox of faith. It grows best in places where everything else is stripped away. Because then, we finally see what really holds us. And what held Paul was not tradition or talented, was truth. Truth that God finishes what he starts. Truth that storms pass and chains break. Truth that even in the silence, heaven is singing over us. Let that truth sing over you now. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders release. You don't have to carry it all. You never did. Faith in crisis is still faith. And this season, though heavy, is holy. You are being prepared for more. Paul's chains didn't end his mission. They extended it. And your challenge is not your conclusion, it's your calling. Sleep now, not as one defeated, but as one deeply loved. The road continues, and grace goes with you. For so long, it had been a destination, a calling, a promise. Now, it was real. Paul arrived still a prisoner, still chained but not in defeat. He arrived in fulfillment. The journey had been long, fraught with danger, delay, and divine intervention. And yet, here he stood. On Roman soil, the heart of the empire, the place God had said he must reach. It didn't look like triumph. There was no parade, no celebration, just a guarded walk to a rented home under surveillance. But Paul wasn't discouraged. He knew purpose isn't always loud. Sometimes, it whispers through obedience. He was allowed to live by himself, with a soldier to guard him. And in that quiet space, Paul did what he always did. He ministered. He called the Jewish leaders in Rome. He explained why he was there. He told them of Jesus, the fulfillment of the promise, the hope of Israel. Some believed, some did not. But all heard. Paul used every breath to bear witness. For 2 years, he stayed there welcoming all who came, teaching, writing, praying, encouraging. He couldn't go out, but the world came to him. And from that small, guarded room, the message spread. Letters left his hands and reached hearts he would never see. Faith grew across borders he could not cross. This was not the end. It was an expansion. Rome didn't silence Paul. It amplified him. Because the power of purpose isn't in mobility, it's in message. And Paul's message was clear. Jesus Christ, risen, reigning, redeeming. So tonight, remember this: your destination may not look like you imagined. Your victory might come quietly, but it's still holy. Paul reached Rome not to escape, but to equip. And in your own journey, trust that every delay, every detour, has been leading you not just to a place, but to a purpose. Rome is not the finish line. It's the beginning of greater things. Paul's first steps in Rome were quiet, but significant. He wasn't welcomed as a hero. He wasn't honored as a prophet. He was simply a prisoner yet. He carried more freedom in his soul than most in that empire. He had no synagogue pulpit, no public square, no open road, but he had a room, and he had visitors, and he had the Spirit of God. That was enough. In that small space, Paul created sacred ground. Every conversation became a seed. Every letter became a legacy. He couldn't travel anymore, so his words did. He wrote to the churches reminding them of grace, urging them toward love, calling them to unity. He spoke of contentment in all circumstances, of joy in suffering, of peace that surpasses understanding. And he lived it. Day after day, he met with believers and skeptics alike. Some came with questions, some came with doubt, but all left marked by his faith. Paul didn't use his chains as an excuse. He used them as a platform. Because real purpose isn't about what we can do. It's about who we are. And Paul was a man wholly surrendered. He trusted that even the confinement had a purpose, that God could reach farther through his limited hands than Paul ever could on foot. And so he stayed. He wrote Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon letters that still breathe today. And that's what Rome became, a womb for revelation. Not the end of the road, but the birthplace of enduring truth. Let that settle into your heart tonight. You may feel restricted. You may feel unseen. But what you're building in secret has eternal reach. God doesn't need wide roads to make a wide impact. He just needs a willing heart. Like Paul's. Like yours. Imagine the contrast. Outside Paul's window, Rome buzzed with military parades, political schemes, and the daily ambitions of empire. But inside, in that modest room, heaven moved quietly. There were no chariots, no horns, no crowds. Just ink, parchment, prayer, and presence. And still, that room changed history. Because faith doesn't require spectacle. It only requires sincerity. And Paul's sincerity burned brighter than the torches of Caesar's court. He wrote of spiritual armor. He spoke of grace lavished upon us. He proclaimed the mystery now revealed that Christ dwelled within, uniting Jew and Gentile, slave and free. Paul's heart was full even when his hands were chained. He welcomed everyone. He judged no one. He offered truth, not pressure love, not law. And the church in Rome grew stronger. Visitors came from faraway places. Soldiers listened. Converts returned home changed. Paul was sowing the gospel in every direction from a seat of confinement. Because God's kingdom doesn't need kings to approve. It grows in hidden places. And Paul's room was one of them. Even the guard chained to him daily heard every prayer, every conversation, every sacred word. That's how the message spread not just in books, but in hearts. So don't despise your small spaces, your room, your job, your quiet influence. It's more powerful than you think. If God could use Paul in prison to shape eternity, he can use you exactly where you are. And as the days passed, Paul's peace didn't dim. He didn't grow bitter. He grew bolder. He had come to Rome in chains, but he had arrived at destiny. And he knew whether he lived or died, his life was a living testimony. So sleep now in that same truth. Your location does not limit your purpose. Rome was never just a city. It was a stage. And tonight, so is your life. Be faithful in the room you're in, because heaven is watching, and the story is still being written. In Rome, Paul saw the world from a window. He didn't walk the streets as a missionary. He sat as a messenger. And yet, the Spirit moved just as powerfully. There is something profound about stillness that speaks. About staying when you want to run. About trusting God with the pace of your journey. Paul's final years were not what he would have chosen, but they were exactly what God had ordained. He understood that his mission wasn't defined by freedom, but by faithfulness. He lived with the awareness that every moment mattered, and in those moments, he poured out wisdom. He urged believers to live worthy of their calling, to be patient and kind, to forgive, to bear with one another in love, to shine like stars in a dark world. He taught that the church is not a place, it's a people, a body, joined and held together by love. And that's what Paul built in Rome, a body of believers who carried his flame forward. When his time neared its end, he didn't panic. He reflected. He wrote to Timothy, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." That is the cry of a soul satisfied. Not because everything went as planned, but because everything went through God's hands. Paul's arrival in Rome was not an arrival at glory, but a surrender to purpose. And tonight, that same peace is offered to you. You don't need to rush to the next milestone. You don't need to fear what's ahead. You only need to be present and faithful, like Paul, like the church in Rome, like every believer who quietly shapes the world from rooms the world overlooks. Your presence is enough. Your prayer is powerful. Your obedience is eternal. Sleep now, not chasing arrival, but resting in purpose. You are already where you need to be, and grace is already here. As the final pages of this journey close, let your heart remain open. You've walked through storms and shipwrecks. You've stood on unknown shores. You've watched Paul cling to hope in chains and pray with peace in crisis. And you felt the gentle whisper of faith in every word. Now, you rest. But this rest is not escape. It is arrival. An arrival into stillness, into clarity, into trust. Paul's story is not a fairy tale. It doesn't wrap up in victory parades or worldly glory. It ends, as all true stories of faith do not in conclusion, but in continuation. Because his faith lives on, in letters read across centuries, in believers who choose obedience over ease, in hearts that hold hope when everything else is lost. And tonight, in you, as your body softens into sleep, carry this. You are part of a bigger story, one not defined by comfort or control, but by calling. And like Paul, you are never truly alone. God is with you in the chaos and the calm. He is in the silence, in the space between questions and answers, in the breath you just took, and the one you'll take next. So, as your eyelids grow heavy, let go of what weighs you down. Let go of fear. Let go of what you can't fix. Let go of what's ahead. You've made it to the shore. You've reached your realm, not because everything is perfect, but because peace has found you. And it's enough. You are safe. You are seen. You are surrounded by grace. Sleep now, not to escape, but to renew. For tomorrow, the story continues. And you will wake, held by the same hands that carried Paul. Faithful, present, steady, even here, even now, especially now. Paul's journey reminds us that faith is not about the absence of struggle. It is about presence. God's presence in the middle of the trial, and our presence in the moment we're given. You may not face Roman courts or Mediterranean storms, but you face challenges of your own, moments of waiting, days of silence, nights of questions. And like Paul, you are invited to keep believing, not perfectly, but persistently, to rise each morning with just enough light for one more step, to rest each night, knowing God never sleeps. This kind of faith is forged in the unseen when we pray without answers, serve without applause, love without limit. It's the faith of parents raising children in grace, the faith of workers showing up with integrity, the faith of friends standing beside one another in grief. It's the small things, repeated with trust, that shape eternal things. That was Paul's strength. Not that he avoided hardship, but that he kept moving through it with peace. He let go of what he couldn't control. He clung to what never changed. And you can do the same. Let this be your permission to release what's heavy, to breathe deeper, to sink into the softness of this moment. You are not required to have every answer. You are only invited to trust the one who does. That trust is the beginning of rest. Real rest. Rest that isn't passive, but purposeful. Rest that resets your soul and renews your spirit. So now, as the story quiets and the night deepens, stay here, in this stillness, in this sacred hush. Let grace speak over you. You are enough, because God is enough in you. Even in the quiet of your room, in the comfort of your bed, this journey is alive in you. Because Paul's faith wasn't about geography, it was about intimacy. His confidence didn't come from what he saw, but from who he knew. And tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you are held by that same certainty. This is not the end. Your story, your calling continues. With each breath, with each morning, with each act of kindness, the light spreads, the story expands. You are part of the movement. You are part of the miracle. Like Paul, you don't have to see the whole picture. You just have to say yes to the peace God gives you. Yes, to today. Yes, to trust. Yes, to peace over pressure. Yes, to rest. The world will still spin tomorrow. There will be emails and headlines and tasks. But right now, none of that matters. Right now, you are where you need to be. Safe, sane, still. Let your body surrender. Let your mind quiet. And let your heart open to hope again. It's okay to hope. It's okay to heal. It's okay to need help. Paul needed people. He needed prayer. He needed God's mercy. And so do we. There's no shame in surrender. There's only peace. So take one more breath. Let it be slow. Let it remind you that God's not done. You are here, at the edge of sleep, wrapped in grace. And tomorrow, when you rise, you'll do so lighter, clearer, stronger, because you've remembered the journey is not about arrival, it's about abiding. And you are abiding now, deep in God's love, right where you're meant to be. Let the rhythm of Paul's story be your rhythm too, not in dramatic movements, but in steady faithfulness, one step at a time, one prayer at a time, one act of love at a time. It's not about reaching Rome. It's about remaining rooted. Rooted in the knowledge that storms don't define you, God does. Rooted in the truth that even shipwrecks serve a purpose. Rooted in the peace that even if your path is paused, your progress is not. There is deep, holy meaning in the pause, in the in-between, in the quiet. Paul knew it. He didn't rush. He rested. And in that rest, God worked. So now, as sleep gently invites your body to release and your mind to settle, follow the invitation. Rest in the quiet. Rest in the story. Rest in the one who has always been with you. From Jerusalem to Caesarea, from shipwreck to Malta, from chains to Rome, from confusion to peace. God has never left your side, and He never will. His love surrounds you now. It sings in the silence. It settles in your breath. It cradles you as the world dims and softens. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are becoming. Becoming someone who trusts deeper, who loves stronger, who believes, even when believing feels hard. That is the faith of Paul. That is your faith too. So sleep well tonight. Let grace be your blanket. Let mercy be your melody. And let tomorrow wait. For tonight is sacred. You are not alone. You are enough. You are loved. And the story, the beautiful, redemptive, eternal story continues. Even here, especially here, right where you are. Good night.